Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this February 11, 2015 edition of Nightcast. Our opening story tonight, a sandstorm with winds reaching 100 kilometers an hour is causing disruption across the Middle East. Egypt has temporarily closed two of its seaports due to strong waves. The sea defenses along Beirut's famous Corniche have been damaged, and flights to and from the airport at Eilat in Israel have been grounded. A wind swept, you'll hear the wind around him as he speaks. Quentin Somerville reports from Jerusalem.
Winds that are gusting up to 100 kilometers an hour have reduced the visibility here in Israel. That means that seaports have closed. There are waves cresting up to 12 meters high, and airports have had to close in some parts of the country because of this weather. But let's look over this way. Here, as we look towards the occupied territories, to Beit Zahur and to Beit Jela and to Bethlehem over there, you can see the filth, and the visibility is really being reduced here, down to less than a kilometre in some areas. That dust is coming all the way from the Sahara. That giant filthy cloud is blowing across the Mediterranean, and it's affecting Egypt, it's affecting Jordan, it's affecting Israel, it's also affecting Syria and Lebanon. People here have been told to stay indoors, to close their windows, not to do any sports, especially if they're elderly or if they have breathing problems. We're expecting that this dust storm will continue for about 24 hours, and the bad news from meteorologists here in Israel is it will then be followed by snow.
And it does sound pretty heavy there in the area around Israel. And friends, you know, some time ago I went over scriptures that show that God is in complete control of the weather. I gave you scripture after scripture after scripture, a lot of them. We want to turn next, friends, to news out of Greece. Greece's anti-austerity government is presenting its first concrete proposals for an alternative debt plan at an emergency meeting of Eurozone finance ministers in Brussels. Meanwhile, a huge crowd has gathered in Athens to show support for the new government, which wants to overhaul 30% of its bailout obligations, replacing them with a 10-point plan of reforms.
Welcome to Athens, where two unusual things are happening tonight. First of all, it is bitterly cold. There was plenty of snow around today, which I can tell you is extremely rare here in the Greek capital. And second of all, there was a big pro-government rally taking place. Now, I was based here in Athens for 3 years during the financial crisis, and I can tell you that this city centre was usually the scene of violent anti-government protests, with petrol bombs thrown and tear gas fired. But tonight, it is a peaceful pro-government rally to coincide with the meeting of Eurozone finance ministers in Brussels. A huge crowd has turned out here to say that they support their government in the attempts to renegotiate Greece's bailout with the Eurozone and with the IMF to end the painful austerity that has put 1 in 4 out of work here and 1 in 3 below the poverty line. Now, the Greek finance minister is currently in Brussels. He's meeting his Eurozone counterparts, and he will say that Greece will accept about 70% of the bailout conditions, but it wants an end to the other 30%. It wants an end to austerity. It wants to raise the minimum wage, for example. It wants to provide electricity to 300,000 or so Greeks who've had their power cut off because they can't afford it. It wants to end privatizations, and it wants to exchange Greek debt for bonds that will only be repaid once the Greek economy starts growing. Now, you can see here the big crowd that has gathered in support of those proposals. They say that this government has been elected with a big democratic mandate to end the bailout and end the austerity. The problem for Greece is that Greece's Eurozone counterparts, notably Germany and other northern Eurozone countries that have contributed the lion's share of Greece's €240 billion bailout, say that's not acceptable. They want Athens to stick to its previous pledges and previous commitments.
Now, friends, that's Greece tonight. Earlier today, the Greek government won a vote of confidence, solidifying domestic support for its plan to renegotiate the terms of the country's bailout. The current EU-IMF deal expires on February 28, end of this month, and Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras' government has drawn up, as we mentioned earlier, a 10-point plan to replace 30% of the bailout. Eurozone finance ministers are due to hold an emergency meeting on the matter today in Brussels. I should say, well, this report is from early this morning, so they're saying that at some point today there was a meeting in Brussels, an emergency meeting on this. We have a report from Athens with Chris Morris.
A cold front in Greece as public disputes about the future of austerity begin to get ugly. Parliament has approved the government's policy programme, but what about a deal with the rest of the Eurozone? Everyone is listening closely. These are former employees of the former public broadcaster ERT, now working without pay. When ERT was abruptly shut down in 2013, they filled the street in protest. This pop-up broadcaster is now based in a union office across the road, but Syriza says ERT will soon be reopened as it rolls back austerity.
The master goal is you and I live happily. Okay, less money, less, but first live, and then happily. We must find a way to live as European countries, not as the emperor and his subjects.
Opinion polls suggest plenty of people like the fact that Greece seems to be on the front foot, taking its arguments to Europe. And the government has now put forward what it will see as compromise proposals, but they still involve reversing a series of austerity measures, spending more on the poor, and swapping a huge chunk of debt for bonds based on future economic growth. Will the rest of the Eurozone simply say yes to all of that? I wouldn't bet the house on it. So Syriza may have to compromise further, but it seems unwilling to do anything that prevents it from governing in the way it has promised.
We have always said that the Eurozone is a threat, but it's not threatened by forces like Syriza who want more social justice, who want a fairer deal for labour. They're threatened by the policies of austerity that, as we know, destroyed previous fixed exchange rate systems, and they may well destroy this monetary union as well.
But there's not much wiggle room. The ships that pass through the Corinth Canal have to stick to the straight and narrow. And when it comes to the bailout programme, Germany and others say Greece has to do the same. In a nearby coffee bar, they talk of the growing dispute between Greece and its Eurozone partners. But it doesn't seem to scare them.
Scary is what we live now. Is nothing is going to go worse. There's nothing that we can do to fix it. The government has to do something now.
That may be Syriza's mandate, but in Europe they will not get everything they want. Chris Morris, BBC News, Athens.
Thank you, Chris. And friends, related to news today from the Ukraine, according to most recent figures, between January 31 and February 5, fighting in populated areas in the region claimed the lives of at least 263 civilians and wounded a further 674 people. Many of those died in the rebel stronghold of Donetsk, where the sound of shelling is almost constant. Ambulance crews often risk their lives responding to calls and attending to patients. BBC News joined a team of paramedics in Donetsk and witnessed the danger and challenges they face every day. Now, in this video, friends, it's a part of a BBC magazine. I need to give credit for the camera and editing to Abdujalil Abdurasev. The producer is Olga Ivshina.
Мне кажется,
его вынесла вместе с батареей, как плохо разговаривает. Не знаю, контузия или что. Так, говорит, ничего
Вы
не...
меня слышите?
Да.
Нормально. Что произошло?
Снаряд.
Вот, стоял возле окна, я сидела на диване, нас вынесла взрывной волной на середину комнаты. А ему батарея еще по нему, вот батарея.
Все на себя взяла.
И фамилия, имя, отчество, число, месяц, год рождения.
Да.
Давай. Страшно работать. По снарядами в основном. Вот. Ну, мы знаем, как говорится, закоулочки дороги, поэтому и объезжаем, и все остальное. Крестимся, оказываем помощь и так и живем.
Как раз они были на адресе, и начался обстрел, и машина попала под осколки. Водителя успели, как раз там ребята повезло, что были, что не успели водителя вытащить тоже. И всех в подъезд затащили, свободно выбили двери в квартире и запрятали всех, всю бригаду. А потом помогли же эту женщину еще погрузить и быстро нас отправить. Вот так вот.
Какое отопление? Нету. Вот так вот ходим все тепленько. Темно, света нету, холодно, ну что делать? Тут весь вооружен до зубов. Фонарики тут. Он фонарик только хороший же купила, потому что это самое. Свечечки побольше. И все остальное. Зажигалка, спички. Ну а что, как-то ж по-другому. Так, вот такой пырог. Адреса тяжелые очень. Их не так много, но они тяжелые, потому что бомбежка, инфаркты, все вот это самое, кризы гипертонические, инсульты в основном. Старики сколько они, как бомбежка такие. Или труп, или очень крайне тяжелое состояние, потому что они не принимают лекарства, денег нет, условий нет для жизни. Вот так вот. Страшно просто все это. Надеемся на лучшее, так же, как жизнь повернет.
Friends, I hope this ending story for tonight will help you be able to pray for these people and these events as Jesus Christ instructed us to do in Luke 21, verse 36, telling us to watch and pray always. And go ahead, be selfish about it, because Christ said, if you do that, if you watch and if you pray, the promise he holds out is that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things. And when he said all these things, he was referring to these things you see in the middle of our chart here. Let me zoom it in. That talks about these seals from the book of Revelation, the first four of which we're seeing extremely active now. The religious deception that's gone on since right after the days of Christ, and of course even including during the days of Christ in a certain way with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but then with the coming of a religion out of Rome that claims to be built on Peter, we've seen religious deception all the way back since that early Ephesian first era of the church. And the red horse, the second seal of Revelation, depicted by a red horse, Jesus Christ described as war and rumors of war. Most of our stories these past few nights and tonight have been related to this horse, this second seal, the red horse of war, leading to World War to come, which World War, when it's revived in round 3, will equate to the fifth seal. We'll get to that in a moment. The third and fourth seal are depicted by a black horse and a pale horse, famine and disease epidemics, and trouble and seismic activity. Commotions in the air, commotions on the ground. A lot of those happening in the past months and in the past year and a half, a lot of that kind of activity. And that fifth seal, which Jesus Christ described in Matthew 24, or he named it in Matthew 24 as great tribulation, which will be a time, if we take a look at, let me come out from there, and let's go to a chart behind me here, our picture behind me. On this chart we have, not that part, we need to go down below it. We have, you see there, the crown of the Holy Roman Empire right in the middle, right here. Once that crown is placed on the head of the seventh and final dictator, an emperor, the Bible calls him a beast. Once that crown is placed on the head of that beast by the false prophet, a woman that represents a big, huge church in the world, that the church which has been coronating the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire for the past hundreds of years. And the Pope will fly to Frankfurt, Germany, to the Emperor's Hall, meet with the emperor who is given his power by 10, what the Bible calls 10 kings, 5 from the east, 5 from the west. And those kings will either be over countries or regions or reborderized areas, and they'll give their power to this beast. The Pope will place this crown from the Holy Roman Empire. It's on display now in Vienna in the Royal Treasury, inside a little glass case, very strong glass case with lots of guards around. No way you'll walk out of that building with that crown. Friends, anybody with a criminal nature thinking of stealing something, that's definitely not something you're going to want to try to steal. There's probably a lot of the demonic world would be all over you, and the physical guards in Vienna would be all over you. They anticipate this crown being worn again, and they've got it very well protected, although they've got it on public display. But you can't touch it. It's behind very strong glass. And once this crown is worn for its last time on the seventh and final head of the Holy Roman Empire, it'll be the time of, as we said, as Jesus Christ denominated it, named it, the Great Tribulation, time of World War III, the time of the crowning of the seventh and final head of the Holy Roman Empire, a time of a great martyrdom of God's saints. It'll be the time the Philadelphia era is taken in the promise that Christ made in Luke 21:36, that you may escape all these things to come, and in the place that he's prepared in the wilderness to which he will fly the woman, his church. It'll be the time the two witnesses are giving their testimony. And they're not on the scene yet. We don't know who they are yet, but they'll be testifying worldwide. Probably a good choice of word right there, too. They'll be testifying worldwide. That ought to rub it in some. Once those two are going, they'll have the power to dry up the heavens. They'll have the power to bring lightning, fire down from heaven. Now, the false prophet will also have the power to do certain miracles, and those who are not close to God and not praying and studying and praying about watching world news and praying about these things now will probably be deceived by the one doing those false miracles. And friends, we're going to sign off. That's it for tonight. Thanks for joining me on this Wednesday evening. Let me come back and get the right slides going here. For this Wednesday evening on Nightcast, God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again with some of our new equipment. We're pulling things out of the rack. We got our lighting kind of messed up tonight, and we've got some new equipment, new cables in, and we're trying to get all that hooked up, and it'll enable us to keep our levels a little smoothed out. We're looking forward to playing with that, because you got to experiment around with it, and so we'll see what happens tomorrow night and the next few nights ahead. Again, as I said, God willing, we'll be back again with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy tomorrow night, Thursday night, here on Nightcast. Until next time, friends, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long and good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.